Hi, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts. This is going to be a little bit of a different video. I think if you watch my channel, you know that I've been on kind of a journey with my reading. There are certain areas that I hadn't explored before, short stories, poetry, etc. And one of the things that I don't do very often, though I have recently thought I really want to, is rereading. I have not been a rereader per se. Obviously, I read 84 Charing Crossroad every single New Year's Day. It's kind of something that I've done for many, many years. But other than that, I really don't tend to gravitate to books that I've already read. In some cases, I always felt that maybe it was too perfect. My memory was perfect as it was, and I didn't want to taint it. I didn't want to love it less. But I have recently started annotating books. And through annotating books, what appealed to me was this ability to have a conversation with the author, and then also with yourself when you came back to it at a later time. So that really sounded exciting to me. So I've started to annotate certain books. Now, of course, not every book is annotation worthy, as we know, but there are some that are just exquisite, that there's something in their writing. So in this video, I will start without having reread it. I'm just going to hold up a book and tell you what I remember. What I remember about it. Oh God, it's going to be so dicey. What I remember about it. And then I'll come back after reading it, and it'll all be in the same video. And I'll tell you the new things I experienced. Did it live up to my memories? Did it not? So I have picked, this is Kazu Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. And I picked this up at a used bookstore. It's a nice, clean copy, but it's not anything precious. I'm going to be able to annotate to my heart's delight, and I'm really excited about it. So let's start first with what do I remember about this book. So I remember that this is kind of a life in reflection kind of story. We have a butler for a very huge estate, very important estate, who is at a moment of crossroads in his life, should we say, where I can't remember if he's being pushed out or he's being encouraged or he thinks he needs to retire. But he has been a butler's butler. He's been like the epitome of what a butler can and should be, and always living in service. And so that was the most important thing to him. If I remember correctly, his family had also been in service. And so this is something that he was very proud of, is the generational contributions. In this crossroads that he finds himself, he is I think he wants to go visit someone who meant a lot to him. And he didn't have many relationships because everything was about being a butler. Everything was about the family and the estate. But I think she was the housekeeper, the head housekeeper. There was an affinity and a care for this woman. Maybe it was love that I think was postponed or not discussed, not talked about. And therefore, he's trying to see, like, maybe now's the time. Is it too late? But he's curious about her and just wants to kind of feel things out, I guess, is the way to say it. So that's what I remember. I remember, as with all of Ishiguro's novels, the writing is exquisite. What I'm looking for, so this is kind of like the second question that I'll ask, is what I'm looking for in a reread of this is I want to understand and watch how Ishiguro pulled off what I considered at the time I read it almost like a magic trick, where even though Stevens is at the forefront and Stevens is the one we're following, there's all sorts of things happening in the background that are incredibly important, and stuff that we understand from history, that are going to have repercussions, that are going to be, have implications on history. So I'm really curious to know and to observe, knowing that, how does Ishiguro soften the focus on Stevens while having all this background stuff happening without dimming Stevens' light? But it's like this the scene change without anybody leaving the stage. So I'm really curious how he does that. I'm also really curious about plotting, about where it comes in. So it's really about things I'm curious about are the craft of it, and sentences, that his sentence structure. So that's the tee up. When you see me next in this video, I will have read it and I will give you my thoughts. So this is kind of like the before, and stay tuned for the after. And I'm back. So I have just finished The Remains of the Day by Kashi Ishiguro. Before I get started, I need to say this is going to spoil everything for you if you have not read this. This whole experience of the then and now rereads is about talking not just about the book and reviewing the book, but also reviewing myself as a reader, my experience as a reader, and reflecting on both of those things. So in order to do that, I'm really going to need to talk about the entire book. So if you have not yet read this, here's your point to save this, hopefully, and go read the book and then come back. In the last part of the video, I talked about how I was most curious about the backstory and watching how that was crafted and how it was put together. And what I experienced was an understanding that it wasn't so much in the background as I was singularly spotlighting Stevens as our main character. Stevens is the butler. He is the butler supreme. He's the uber butler. He is myopically obsessed with his role, with providing an amazing experience of being the right hand and the person that gets everything humming in this estate, and being of service to Lord Darlington, and then to the new owner, who is an American. He is a person who is wholly, shockingly incurious about anything other than those topics. His life is about devotion and service, but only, as I said, myopically focused on the running of this home. And it means that he has huge gaps, huge things that he does not understand about socialization. There's hilarious passages where he cannot figure out how to get along with, or even what his new boss wants, the American gentleman wants. The American gentleman has like this kind of banterish manner, and so he's trying to play it back, and it's so awkward and it's so difficult because he's practicing. It's not natural for him. He is someone who observes, watches, but he only watches for where he's needed. He doesn't watch for anything further, which is one of the biggest challenges of his character, and that unfolds in this book as he has a midlife crisis, I would say. So in the beginning of the book, he is given the opportunity to, maybe for the very first time, have a vacation and leave the home, leave the house. And that's because the new American owner is going back to the United States for a bit, and he is offered to give him access to the car and to pay for the gas, to kind of give him an opportunity to actually see the country that he's lived in his entire life. Stevens at first has no interest in doing this, but then he starts to feel that he actually needs to, because and again, he has to wrap everything into business, everything into his profession. He has been making some mistakes that worries him, because he doesn't want to acknowledge that he's getting older and that he may be aging out of his role, as his father did, to horrifying consequences. But instead he realizes it's because they've been so short-staffed, they've been so cut from a budgetary perspective, that he doesn't have the staff he needs to help support him. And it's through a letter he receives from Mrs. Ben, who he knows and he still refers to as Miss Kenton, who was his peer, his housekeeper to as he was the butler. And she was really the moral center and the emotional center of this home. And since leaving, there's been a huge gap. And one could say that, oh, well, the gap, he was focused on the gap because it meant that more people had to do things and he had to assume more responsibilities. But really, the gap is also emotional. And he didn't really know how to bridge the gap. So he has made this his mission, that he's going to take a journey across England to where she lives to try to convince her to come back into service. And he thinks it's going to be easy because he's reading into this letter that she's unhappy. He's reading into this letter that she's looking for an excuse, and her best memories were of Darlington Hall. So that's his purpose. And he starts setting off on this trip. And he's wholly incapable of being out of his milieu. And he's awkward. He's forced to think and ruminate and to reflect back on his life of service, and to some surprising realizations that he has. And some of them are stated, and some of them you only know because he's the one who's talking about them. So he must recognize the story that he's telling. He must recognize the folly, the misinterpretation, or the miscommunication that happened. So that's kind of the setup. But then, as I talked last time, I talked about this kind of backdrop. There's a theme that's going on in this book, and the theme is about professionalism versus amateurism. And this comes through in a few different ways. He obviously is the consummate professional. He's obsessed with it. It is his life's blood to be the consummate butler. And he agonizes over the stupidest mistakes, the dumbest, silliest, literally inconsequential. But meanwhile, he's so focused on being of service, he's not addressing what he's in service to. And by that, I mean, there are meanings that are being held because Lord Darlington is applying this kind of old world view onto the realities after World War I. And so he's taking this principled approach and saying that the Versailles Treaty and the debt repayment that Germany is under, that Germany is expected to do for the world because of World War I, is cruel, because that's not how honorable countries treat when they have a victory. You don't rub you don't rub the spoils in the face of the person who is vanquished. You don't. It's inappropriate. It is cruel to do things like this. And so he is principally thinking that this is not this is beneath the British government. It's beneath the nation to be forcing so many restrictions and that it's cruel. So that's the lens that he's coming to the world with. And, to a certain degree, we know what happened and how the World War II ended up happening because it was used, all of these privations were used as justification to start up the next war. And so I started off saying, interesting, like, okay, I can see that although it's very dated and it's a very, it's this understanding that kings are at the helm fighting each other as opposed to the modern world that's actually at play. So he's pulling together these coalitions of people, and he's trying to set up these meetings, these kind of backdoor meetings in these grand palaces of England, to try to build a coalition that tries to undo the Versailles Treaty, that tries to undo those reparations that were being demanded of Germany. And so Stevens doesn't question, doesn't doubt, doesn't stop to think of what this could mean or if this is good or bad. He stands up for his boss. He is devoted. He is focused on, yes, that has to be the right thing because it's Lord Darlington. At one point, Lord Darlington has a group there, and it's a Frenchman, French diplomat, it's an American diplomat, and also I think someone from Parliament, from English Parliament there. And they're trying to, he's arrived, staged the arrivals so that he can start to build a coalition so that when the Frenchman arrives, they can try to persuade together this Frenchman to come to their side and their way of thinking. And the American kind of causes a lot of havoc. And the assumption is because the Americans don't want they need the reparations because we spent so much money, the United States spent so much money on World War I. And so we have a vested interest in keeping it. And so he's kind of throwing some wrenches into the works by, sneakily going behind the scenes and talking to certain people and spreading gossip. Stevens overhears this and decides to step in and kind of share that information to Lord Darlington. That leads to this big confrontation where I can't remember whether it was the Englishman or the Frenchman. It may have been the Frenchman, who basically said, there's a difference between professionals and amateurs. And you, Lord Darlington, are an amateur. You are playing politician, you're playing diplomat, and you don't really understand the stakes. You don't understand the ways that things are done now. And this is dangerous. You're playing a very dangerous game. And that becomes kind of a thread that also gets picked up with Stevens, because he's looking at the new breed of butlers that are coming into his profession. And he's thinking about the people that he aspired to be. And then he's looking at the people that are coming in, and they are nowhere near and have no interest in being the great servant and living a life of service and full devotion with pristine manners and the ability to anticipate any possible need of anyone, any important person who should possibly come through their doors. And all with ease and dignity. There's a really huge emphasis on dignity. And what does dignity mean? And is dignity reserved for only the upper class? Really fantastic themes here. And so Stephen, in his incuriosity, doesn't really see what's starting to happen. And it's only Miss Kenton who's getting upset and starting to get really angry, and especially when she is asked to fire two of her young housekeepers only because they're Jewish, in anticipation of the German ambassador, the German leader who's coming and going to be staying with them, who is really manipulating Lord Darlington, really playing with him and he's trying to influence Lord Darlington into fascism, into understanding, because of, this idea of, honor in war, leveraging that to pull Lord Darlington into building a coalition for him in the UK. So we have that all of that that's happening. And it's fascinating. And, as I thought back, I really thought that this was all happening really subtly in the background. And to a certain degree, yes, but only because I think I was reading for character. And the only characters we're really following and really learning about is Stevens, right? He's kind of like the pinhole spotlight is on him. But I recognized as I was reading this that there's a lot that is visible, but you just have to understand what you're seeing as you're seeing it. And to a certain degree, Ishiguro is not unveiling all of it. He's showing it as it's happening, but then adding the reflections a little later as Stevens is traveling through the country and meeting more people. And when they hear where he lives and that he lived with and served Lord Darlington, they are aghast that he served and supported a Nazi or someone with Nazi sympathies. And so you get to see that, it became a scandal. It became something, a really big thing, because he chose the wrong alliances, Lord Darlington. And you see Stevens retreating back from his confidence that Lord Darlington could do no wrong, even disavowing him. And so that was fascinating. Then you also have the story, kind of the midlife crisis that Stevens is having in his relationship with Miss Keaton. And when we look at it, we can see that he's like a robot. He acted only for the house, and he did not know how to engage or listen to other people or be thoughtful, kind, to show the same kind of consideration to the grand people coming through the house. He never showed that same kind of care for the people around him. Though he everything was respectful. He's very respectful. He's very thoughtful. But it's Miss Kenton who's the one who has to establish boundaries. She's the one who has to demand certain things of him because he just doesn't know to do it. It is quite appalling. And you see moments where where he's at a precipice and he has a fork in the road. He can go and spend and be by his father's side as his father is dying, or he can be in the room with these fancy people as they're making all of these decisions, which at that time there were plenty of people that could have done that, but this was his moment to rise to the occasion. And he feels that his father would agree that that's what he should do. And to a certain degree, I kind of agree with him, because his father did seem to be someone who also did not know how to connect and only felt that service was the epitome of a life of exceptional service. While there are moments that are amusing, there are more moments that you as the reader recoil from or are shocked by because of the decisions that he makes in the moment, and the inability to understand what he's doing, the inability for him to realize how bad his decision is about to be. Fascinating, really, really fascinating. And so there's a somber cast over this whole thing. We know he's on a quest. We also get a sense that this quest is probably doomed because he is such an unreliable narrator, because he is so unaware of what he's truly about, and he's self-deluded, and he slowly wakes up as he's moving through. And I found it incredibly poignant. I think the ending was just just heartbreaking. Just heartbreaking. All the things that he just never grasped, never saw, or I should say, he did see, but he saw way too late. So this is an understated. It's a very quiet. It's not plotty. It's not plotty. It's very somber, introspective midlife crisis of a very proper butler. I hope you have enjoyed my observations upon a second reading of this. I would love to know, have you read this and what were your thoughts? Stay tuned for more. Leo of Leo's Little Book Life and I are going to be doing more of these throughout the year. So I hope you will tune in, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you. Bye.